Hey guys, and welcome back to EQ Planes. And today, in honor of Swoop closing operations, thought I'd like to make a video taking a quick look at their history and the role they played in the Canadian aviation market. So, without further ado, let's start out with Swoop's inception back in 2017. At this point in time, ultra-low-cost carriers in the style of Spirt Airlines or Ryanair were not nearly as common in Canada as they are today. At the time, the only player in that section of the market was New Leaf, which was a newly formed airline that took its first flight in 2016, mostly utilizing Flair aircraft as charter planes for their services. Eventually, Flair would end up buying out New Leaf to become what is now Canada's largest ULCC. Now, Swoop's parent company Westjet saw this hole in the marketplace and this newfound competition, and with them wanting to move to, at the time, a more full-service direction, they decided it would be a good time to start up their own ULCC. So, on September 27th of 2017, Westjet announced its new ULCC, Swoop. The original plan was to sell tickets with a base fare 40% lower than Westjet flights. In order to do that, they would adopt many of the strategies seen in other successful ULCCs. This seeing the operation at a secondary airports in Canada rather than the main airports like Toronto, Calgary, Montreal, and Vancouver, despite actually being headquartered out of Calgary with WestJet. This would help them to reduce costs by getting rid of things like expensive landing fees that you may find in an airport like Vancouver, and also avoid having Swoop step on their parent company WestJet's toes. It would also offer a far more bare-bones service with no premium product and tighter seats. Along with that, things like carry-on, seat selection, and in-flight service were not included in the price of the ticket, so you would have to pay extra for them. Another thing in effort to keep costs down was, despite being under the WestJet umbrella, Swoop employees were paid less than their mainline counterparts, which would end up being a key contributing factor to their downfall. But with that being said, on June 20th of 2018, Swoop inaugurated their first flight between Hamilton and Abbotsford. Originally, they'd make use of two ex-WestJet 737-800s, and eventually go on to bring on 10 of them. Swoop would expand rather rapidly, with them later in 2018 becoming the first Canadian ULCC to fly regular scheduled flights to the United States, and also scheduled flights to Mexico and other sun destinations from Canada. At the time, Swoop was also subject to an investigation by a Canadian watchdog focusing on competition due to what was considered anti-competitive pricing. However, despite that and some other smaller skirmishes, Swoop went into 2019 continuing to experiment with the ULCC market in Canada, while other ULCCs in the Canadian market like Flair Air also saw rapid growth at the time. However, as with all airlines in the aviation industry, COVID would put a pause on this for a little bit, as Swoop and their parent company WestJet were mostly focused on survival rather than expansion. However, in spite of that, and as part of the recovery procedure for them, they decided to start operating flights out of YYZ, which is contrary to their strategy of operating out of less major Canadian airports. However, with demand being limited, Swoop needed to capitalize on whatever demand they could get. Offering cheap fares at Canada's highest traffic airport would definitely be a way of doing that. However, recovery would come quick, and we saw an explosion of new carriers and ULCC expansions in Canada. Flair Airlines would go on to order plenty of new 737 MAX aircraft, with Lynx Airlines also starting operations with a fleet of new 737 MAXs in 2022. Not only were these new ULCC expansions challenging Swoop in the secondary airports that they served, but also challenging many of Canada's legacy carriers in the main markets like Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal. This newfound competition in the space, this would prompt another expansion of Swoop. However, this time the expansion would feature a new aircraft type to the fleet, that being the 737 MAX 8. It would certainly be a logical addition to the fleet, as WestJet had already operated the type for some time. It would fit well into their all 737-800 operation at this point. The aircraft were also readily available, as the 737 MAX had just come off its almost 2-year-long grounding, and there were also some ex-Norwegian frames that they were able to pick up for what one would assume was a pretty reasonable price. These aircraft would eventually end up arriving at the carrier in late 2022. Aircraft would also help them keep in step with the much newer fleets of Lynx and Flair. However, despite their quick expansion and seemingly WestJet's vote in confidence with them with the new 737 MAX aircraft, 2023 would see trouble on the horizon for Swoop. In May of this year, the pilots' union that represents both WestJet and Swoop threatened to go on strike. The pending strike was over a bunch of factors, however the main one was pay. Pay for WestJet pilots, and largely pay for all major Canadian airlines, is significantly less than the pay you would receive working in the United States as a pilot. And with Swoop pilots being paid even lower than that, as their pay was less than the mainline pay at WestJet, that became a big problem. Initially, Westjet seemed quite stubborn in their position, but with mounting pressure of an incoming strike, they decided to strike a deal. This deal would see higher pay for Westjet pilots. However, for Swoop, this would reveal bad news. As on June 9th of 2023, it was revealed that the shutting down of Swoop was part of the deal. This is something Westjet likely didn't want to do, as they would like to have remained competitive in the ULCC space with Swoop. However, with the agreement to pay Westjet and Swoop pilots more, it was likely an unavoidable part of the deal. Swoop employees and all of Swoop's aircraft would be incorporated into Westjet. The last day of scheduled operations was set for October the 28th of 2023, and that is indeed what ended up happening as Swoop flew their last flight from Cancun to Toronto with the 737-800 landing in Toronto at 12:51 a.m. on October the 29th. With Swoop's 737 MAX 8s being phased out just the week prior. Now, although for WestJet it will be unfortunate for them to lose their ULCC, at least it should be an easy integration back into their fleet. In hindsight, Swoop was likely a fairly low-risk investment for them. It allowed them to dip their toes into the market space while utilizing some of their own already existing aircraft. WestJet has also said they will try and maintain selling low-cost fares, using a slightly tighter cabin configuration on some of their new aircraft. However, it's highly unlikely that they'll be able to replicate the prices that they were able to give with Swoop, or what Lynx and Flair are able to provide. For the time being, it's not known exactly what will happen with the Swoop aircraft. For the upcoming winter season, it doesn't appear that the aircraft will be painted over or retrofitted just yet. It has been rumored that these aircraft may be used to help out Sunwing during this year's winter months, as they fly their last season of operations as well. However, after that, it is likely that the aircraft will be painted back into the WestJet mainline colors and retrofitted with new interiors. The 737 MAX 8s will allow them to further grow their growing MAX fleet, and the 737-800s that had been given to Swoop were already some of WestJet's newest to begin with, so it's likely they'll also stick around for a long time. But overall, Swoop was definitely an interesting chapter in Canadian aviation history. They certainly played a big role in helping ULCCs become a lot more prominent in Canada. And I'm definitely glad I had the opportunity to both fly with them and spot their aircraft. But yeah, be sure to write your experiences with Swoop, both good and bad, in the comments. Thank you guys for watching, and hope to see you guys back next time.